Thursday afternoon settled over East League University with a quiet rhythm that came after the busiest lectures. Students drifted through the academic buildings, some in groups, some alone. Gloria walked through the humanities corridor with her phone in one hand. A message from Celine filled the screen. "Don't forget to buy snacks on your way back." Gloria smiled to herself and typed a quick reply. She slipped the phone into her jacket pocket without waiting for an answer. Something collided with her leg. The impact was small, but unexpected enough that she stopped immediately. A little boy stumbled backward, blinking up at her with wide eyes. A box of colored pencils slipped from his hands and scattered across the polished floor. "Oh." Gloria crouched before he could say anything. "Are you okay?" The boy looked at his scraped palm for a second before nodding.
"I'm okay."
"You sure?" Gloria asked gently. He nodded again, this time more confidently. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking." "Neither was I." She smiled. "Looks like we're even." She began gathering the colored pencils while the boy knelt beside her to help. Before either of them finished, a calm voice called from farther down the hallway. "Alec." The boy's head turned instantly. "Mom." A woman approached with measured steps. She wore a long black blazer over neatly tailored clothes that somehow looked effortless instead of formal. Her posture was straight, her expression composed, and her sharp features gave her an intimidating elegance Gloria recognized almost immediately. Professor Lucille. Gloria had seen her round campus once or twice before. Mostly from a distance. People always seemed to lower their voices whenever she walked past. Lucille stopped beside them. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at Gloria first before turning to her son. "Did you run ahead again?" Alec lowered his head. "Yes." Lucille rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "It's all right," Gloria said, handing Alec the last colored pencil. "No one got hurt." Alec accepted it with a shy smile. "Thank you." Lucille met Gloria's eyes. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Something about her voice caught Gloria off guard. She had expected it to sound as distant as the rumors suggested. Instead, it was quiet and patient. Not warm, just softer than she'd imagined. The difference became even clearer when Lucille looked back at Alec. "Did you remember everything?" Alec held up the pencil box proudly. "I think so." Lucille checked it anyway before closing the lid. "Good." The brief exchange lasted only a few seconds, but Gloria noticed how naturally Lucille's guarded expression eased whenever she spoke to her son. It disappeared again the moment she looked away from him. Gloria found herself smiling without realizing it. "Is something amusing?" Gloria laughed softly. "I just wasn't expecting." She hesitated. "I've only ever seen you around campus. And I guess I imagined you'd be." Gloria rubbed the back of her neck. "You'd be more terrifying." For a heartbeat, Lucille simply looked at her. Then the corner of her mouth slightly lifted. "I'll try harder next time." The answer was so unexpected that Gloria laughed. Alec looked between them. "My mom isn't scary." Lucille glanced at him. "Thank you, Alec," Lucille said as Alec smiled. Gloria couldn't help laughing again. The sound echoed lightly through the hallway before fading into the chatter of passing students. Lucille's phone vibrated. She checked the screen, and the hint of amusement left her face. "I'm sorry." She answered immediately. She listened for several moments without interrupting. "I'll be there." The call ended. Lucille remained still, her attention lingering on the dark screen for a second before she looked at Alec. A trace of conflict crossed her face. Almost at the same time, Alec tugged gently on her sleeve. Mom, Lucille let out a slow breath. I've been trying to find someone reliable to watch Alec occasionally. She spoke more to herself than to Gloria. It has been more difficult than I expected. The words escaped Gloria before she had time to think them through. I could help. Lucille looked at her. You. My schedule isn't very packed this semester. Gloria shrugged. I'm a law student, but most afternoons are free. I'm Gloria, by the way. Silence settled between them. Gloria suddenly became aware of how strange her offer sounded. They didn't know each other. Lucille's expression confirmed exactly what Gloria was thinking. Thank you for offering, Lucille said politely. But I'm not sure that's something I can decide so quickly. That's fair. Gloria smiled anyway, hoping to ease the awkwardness. I probably sounded a little random. Before Lucille could answer, her phone rang again. She closed her eyes briefly. When she answered, her voice became all business. I'll be there in 5 minutes. The call ended much sooner this time.
Lucille looked from the phone to Alec.
Then to Gloria. She hesitated. I have an emergency faculty meeting. It shouldn't take more than an hour. Lucille looked almost uncomfortable asking. Would you be willing to stay with Alec until then? She added quickly, I'd rather you remain in my office. I won't be far. Gloria nodded before she could overthink it. Of course. Relief flickered across Lucille's face so briefly. She crouched beside Alec. You'll stay with Gloria while I finish my meeting? Okay. Alec accepted the news without complaint. Lucille stood again. For reasons Gloria couldn't explain, she found herself looking at Lucille once more as the three of them started walking toward the faculty offices. She had planned to head home immediately. Instead, she was following one of the university's most intimidating professors down the hallway while holding a 6-year-old's box of colored pencils. Life had a strange sense of timing. Lucille's office overlooked one of the quieter courtyards on campus. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, falling across overflowing bookshelves and neat stacks of papers that covered half the desk. You can both stay here. I'll be in the conference room across the building. She knelt in front of Alec and adjusted the collar of his sweater. If you need anything, Mrs. Evans is in the office next door. Alec nodded. Lucille looked at Gloria. I'm trusting you with something very important. Gloria smiled. I'll make sure he doesn't escape. Alec giggled. I don't escape. You ran into me 5 minutes ago. That wasn't escaping. Lucille watched the exchange. She wasn't used to seeing Alec relax around strangers so quickly. Most babysitters spent the first hour trying to win him over. Gloria had somehow managed it in minutes. I'll be back as soon as I can, Lucille said. When the door closed behind her, the office became noticeably quieter. For a moment, neither Gloria nor Alec spoke. Then Alec wandered toward a small table near the window. Do you draw? Gloria asked. He nodded enthusiastically. Every day. What do you draw? Everything. He opened a sketchbook that was already half full. The first page held a crooked castle. The next, a cat with oversized ears. Each drawing was simple, but every page was filled with bright colors. Gloria crouched beside him. These are really good. I know. Gloria blinked, then laughed. I like your confidence. My mom says I shouldn't say they're bad if I have worked hard for them. Your mom sounds smart. Alec looked up at her. She writes books. The scary ones? Gloria asked teasingly. I don't read them. They are complicated, Alex said, handing her a blank sheet. You draw. I'm bad at drawing. She accepted the pencil anyway. After a moment's thought, she sketched an uneven dog with floppy ears. Alex stared at it, then bursted into laughter. Is it a dog? I hoped it was obvious. It looks tired.
It probably is.
Together they added a sun, grass, and a tree behind the exhausted-looking dog until the page looked intentionally silly instead of accidentally bad. The hour passed more quickly than Gloria expected. They drew, played guessing games. Read a picture book that Alec insisted she perform with different voices. A knock sounded at the door, and Lucille stepped inside. Her eyes immediately searched the room. She found Alec sitting cross-legged on the carpet, proudly showing Gloria another drawing. Neither of them had noticed she was back. A quiet breath escaped her. The office looked exactly as she'd left it. Lively even. Alex spotted her first. Mom. He hurried over, holding up the latest drawing. Look. Lucille took it carefully. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a bright blue sky. Lucille looked from the drawing to Gloria. You've been busy. I've mostly been admiring Alex's artwork.
He drew the people.
And I drew the world's most tired dog. Alec laughed. It still looks tired. For the first time since Gloria had met her, Lucille laughed. The sound was quiet and brief, but genuine. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Lucille reached into her handbag and took out several folded bills. Oh, you don't have to. You offered to help. That doesn't mean your time isn't valuable. Gloria accepted the money after a short pause. Thank you. Lucille walked her toward the hallway. I appreciate what you did today. It wasn't difficult. No, Lucille said, looking briefly toward Alec. Apparently it wasn't. Alec slipped his hand into his mother's. Can Gloria come again? Lucille glanced at Gloria before answering. I'll think about it. The answer sounded reserved, but Gloria noticed she hadn't said no. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook. If you ever do need someone. She tore out a page, wrote down her number, and handed it to Lucille. My schedule is pretty flexible. Lucille accepted the paper without looking at it immediately. Thank you. Gloria smiled at Alec. See you around. I'll draw a better dog next time. As Gloria walked down the hallway toward the exit, she found herself smiling. She had expected to spend an hour watching a stranger's child. Instead, she'd met a cheerful 6-year-old who loved drawing and a woman who, despite all the whispers about her, tucked her son's collar straight before every meeting and laughed more softly than anyone Gloria had ever met. Behind her, Lucille stood where Gloria had left her. She unfolded the small piece of paper. Gloria. A phone number followed beneath the name. Lucille read it once, then folded the paper again and slipped it into her blazer pocket before taking Alec's hand. Ready to go home? Alec nodded. Can Gloria babysit me again? Lucille looked ahead as they walked toward the parking lot. I don't know. She had intended the answer for Alec. Instead, it lingered in her own mind all the way to the car. Friday slipped by without another encounter. Gloria attended her morning lectures, argued through a mock case in constitutional law, and spent the afternoon in the library pretending to read a chapter she would have to start over later. By the time she returned to the apartment she shared with Celine, the sky outside had darkened into a cool blue. The smell of fried onions drifted from somewhere down the hallway. Gloria dropped her backpack beside the couch and changed into comfortable clothes before sitting with her laptop. She hesitated only a moment before opening a browser. Professor Lucille. Several results appeared almost immediately. The university profile came first. Professor Lucille Hart, Department of Literature, novelist, researcher. Below that were interviews, articles, and a list of published novels. Gloria blinked. She's written all of these? She clicked on the first title. Then another. Most of them belonged to the romance section. That surprised her. She remembered the composed woman in the black blazer who chose every word carefully and rarely smiled. She didn't seem like someone who would spend years writing about love. Curiosity got the better of her. Gloria opened an interview. The interviewer had asked where her stories came from. Lucille's answer was short. People are complicated. Love only makes them more honest. Gloria read the sentence twice. She had loved fiction since she was young. Not because the stories promised perfect endings. Because they let people become vulnerable in ways real life rarely allowed. She wanted that someday. Not the perfect romance people talked about. Just someone she could choose every day and who would choose her back. The thought lingered longer than she wanted. Once before, she had believed she'd found something close. Instead, she'd spent months learning that wanting someone didn't mean they could ever belong in your life. Since then, she had become careful. The apartment door opened. Celine dropped her tote bag by the entrance and walked over, curiosity already written across her face. "What are you doing?" Gloria turned the laptop slightly. "I'm looking someone up." Celine looked at the screen. "Professor Lucille? You know her?" "I'm a literature student, remember?" Celine laughed as she sat beside her. Gloria closed the article halfway. "I met her yesterday." Celine raised an eyebrow and Gloria told her everything about their encounter. When she finished, Celine smiled and said, "I wouldn't spend too much time waiting for a call." Gloria looked away from the screen. "I wasn't." "You were." Gloria sighed. "Maybe a little." "I've heard she's very private. So, if she doesn't call, don't take it personally." Gloria nodded. "I won't." Even as she said it, she couldn't stop wondering whether Lucille had already decided against hiring her. Her phone buzzed across the coffee table. It was an unknown number with a straight-to-the-point message. "If you're still interested in babysitting Alec, please come to this address tomorrow at 9 in the morning." An address followed beneath. Celine leaned closer. "Is that?" Gloria nodded slowly. "Lucille." For the first time that evening, a smile spread across her face without her realizing it. Celine watched her for a moment before shaking her head with quiet amusement. "I honestly didn't think she'd text." "Neither did I." Gloria looked at the address again. She didn't recognize the street. Whatever she had expected after yesterday, it wasn't this. She typed a simple reply. "I'll be there. Thank you." The response came less than a minute later. "See you tomorrow." Nothing more. Somehow, that made Gloria smile even wider. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. The address Lucille had sent led Gloria away from the busy streets surrounding East League University and into one of the quietest neighborhoods in the city. The houses became larger the farther she walked until iron gates and tall hedges replaced the apartment buildings she was used to passing. She stopped in front of the address one more time. A mansion stood beyond the gates. "You're kidding." For a second, She wondered if she had copied the address incorrectly. She checked her phone. No, this was it. After speaking to the security guard, the gates opened, and she followed a stone path toward the house. A fountain trickled softly in the front garden while trimmed hedges lined the walkway. Someone had clearly spent years caring for the place. A maid welcomed her inside before leading her through a spacious entrance hall. The house was elegant without feeling crowded. Shelves filled with books stood between framed paintings, and sunlight reached through tall windows, warming the polished wooden floors. The maid stopped outside a sitting room. "Miss Lucille is waiting for you." Gloria thanked her before stepping inside. Lucille looked up from fastening the button of her black blazer. She looked ready to leave. "You found the place. I almost convinced myself I'd typed the wrong address." Lucille followed Gloria's glance around the room. "You have a beautiful house." "Thank you. I'm leaving for work shortly." And as if on cue, quick footsteps echoed through the hallway. "Gloria." Alec hurried into the room and threw his arms around her before stopping himself halfway. He looked toward his mother. "Can I?" Lucille nodded. "You don't need permission to greet people, Alec." Alec hugged Gloria properly this time. She smiled as she ruffled his hair. "I see you've been practicing your running." "I didn't bump into anyone." "That's nice." Lucille watched the exchange quietly. Alec rarely became attached to people this quickly. She wasn't sure why Gloria was different. "A maid will show you around the house later," Lucille said. "For now, you'll mostly be in the living room or the garden if Alec wants to play outside." Gloria listened carefully. Lucille continued, "He isn't a difficult child. If he's drawing, you'll barely know he's there." She hesitated before adding, "If anything happens, call me." "I will." Lucille studied Gloria for a brief moment. She still knew very little about the young woman standing in front of her. Yet Alec trusted her. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, that mattered more. "I'll be back this afternoon." With that, she picked up her bag, and as she passed Alec, she rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, saying, "Behave." The front door closed quietly behind her. Gloria looked at Alec. "So, what should we do first?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand and pulled her toward another room. "My drawings." He said it with such certainty that Gloria laughed and followed. The next few hours slipped by more easily than she expected. They drew, built things, run around the garden. By lunchtime, Gloria had learned several things about Alec. She learned that Alec hated tomatoes, loved blueberry jam, and has a best friend called Kim. After they ate, his energy slowly faded. "I'm not sleepy," he mumbled, rubbing one eye. Within minutes, he was asleep on the living room sofa beneath a light blanket a maid had quietly brought over. Gloria lowered the book she'd been reading to him and made sure the blanket hadn't slipped. The room settled into silence. Not wanting to wake him, she stood and wandered toward a small bookshelf built into one corner of the living room. Most of the shelves held novels. One spine caught her attention immediately. Written by Lucille Hart. She reached for it almost without thinking. The cover showed a woman standing alone beneath a cloudy sky. Gloria opened to the first page. She meant to read only a paragraph. Then another. Without noticing, she found herself leaning against the shelf, turning pages one after another. The writing was quiet. It allowed the characters to contradict themselves, to make mistakes, to love imperfectly. Before long, Gloria stopped noticing the room around her. Only the story remained. A familiar voice drifted in from the entrance hall. "Thank you. I'll finish the revisions tonight. Gloria blinked, and the spell broke instantly. She looked toward the doorway. Lucille was handing a folder to one of the maids. Feeling oddly guilty despite doing nothing wrong, Gloria slipped the book back into its place. Lucille entered the living room. I see you've met my library. Gloria smiled, a little embarrassed. I hope you don't mind. I leave books on shelves hoping someone will read them. Her eyes moved briefly to the novel Gloria had returned. You chose that one? I was only going to read one page, and I failed. A faint smile touched Lucille's lips. It happens. Her gaze shifted toward Alec, still sleeping peacefully. He wasn't any trouble? He was great. I enjoyed spending time with him. Lucille nodded thoughtfully. For a brief moment, the room felt unexpectedly comfortable. Gloria found herself wondering if this version of Lucille existed only inside this house, or whether everyone else had simply never stayed long enough to see it. Gloria left the mansion just as the afternoon sun began to soften. The maid walked her to the front entrance before returning inside. As the gates closed behind her, Gloria looked back once. From the outside, the house seemed distant again. Large windows. Perfectly trimmed hedges. A place that felt impossible to imagine belonging to someone she had laughed with only minutes earlier. She adjusted the strap of her bag and started the walk home. Her thoughts kept circling back to the novel she had barely managed to put down. It wasn't only the story. It was the way Lucille wrote people. No grand declarations or perfect relationships. She reached the shopping district just as several bookstores were preparing to close. Almost without thinking, she stepped inside one. The scent of paper and ink settled around her as she wandered between the shelves. A staff member looked up from arranging a display. Can I help you find something? I'm looking for a novel by Lucille Hart. The woman smiled knowingly. Third shelf on your left. There are that many? She has loyal readers. Gloria walked to the section. 5 novels stood neatly beside one another. She ran her fingers lightly across the spines before picking up the one she had started reading earlier that afternoon. I'll take this one. The cashier slipped the book into a paper bag. By the time she reached the apartment, evening had settled over the city. She changed into comfortable clothes, made herself a mug of tea, and settled against the headboard. Outside, the sounds of passing traffic faded as the evening grew quieter. She opened to the page where she had stopped. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The story followed 2 people who loved each other deeply, yet hurt one another without intending to. Neither of them was entirely right. Neither of them was entirely wrong. When the final chapter arrived, Gloria found herself reading more slowly, reluctant for it to end. The last page held a single paragraph. Many people spend their lives searching for a perfect love. Perhaps that is why they miss the real one. Real love is rarely graceful. It is ordinary, untidy, frightening, patient, and sometimes painful. Love without pain is an empty vessel, beautifully decorated, admired from a distance, but never truly held. Gloria closed the book gently. She rested her fingertips against the cover for a long moment. The words stayed with her. She wondered whether someone could write about love like that without having lived through it. Her mind drifted to Lucille. The composed woman in the black blazer. The mother who softened whenever Alex smiled. The professor whose laughter never lasted long. The writer who believed love was something imperfect, yet still worth writing about. Gloria leaned back against the wall and let out a quiet breath. She wasn't trying to understand Lucille anymore.
She wanted to.
That realization lingered with her long after she switched off the bedside lamp. The following week settled into an easy routine. Gloria spent 3 afternoons at the mansion. Some days Alec wanted to draw until every sheet of paper on the coffee table disappeared beneath castles and trees. Other days he insisted they build blanket forts in the living room or read adventure stories in different voices. The routine changed slightly each time, but one thing remained the same. Lucille always returned in the afternoons or evenings. Sometimes she came home carrying a stack of marked essays. Sometimes it was a laptop tucked beneath one arm. No matter how tired she looked, she always looked for Alec first. "How was your day?" He never answered with one sentence. Gloria found herself lingering just long enough to listen before gathering her things. She convinced herself it was because Alec's stories were entertaining. On Thursday afternoon, Alec challenged Gloria to a drawing contest. As they were drawing, their laughter drifted into the hallway just as the front door opened. Lucille stepped inside, slipping off her gloves. She paused when she heard them. For a moment, she stayed where she was. The sound reached her before the living room came into view. Alec was laughing so hard he had fallen sideways onto the rug. Gloria was trying and failing to defend her drawing. Lucille hadn't realized she was smiling until one of the maids greeted her. She straightened immediately. As Alec ran off to find another sheet of paper, Lucille watched him disappear down the hallway and said to Gloria in a soft voice, "Thank you." Gloria looked at her. "For what?" "He seems more happy when you are here." The words were simple, matter-of-fact. Yet something about them settled warmly in Gloria's chest. "I think he's the one making me laugh." Lucille looked toward the hallway where Alec had vanished. "He has that effect." Before either of them could say anything else, the doorbell rang. One of the maids answered it. A familiar voice carried into the living room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jennifer walked in carrying a paper bag from a nearby bakery. Unlike Lucille, she dressed casually, and her smile arrived before her words did. "I brought the pastries you like. You didn't have to." Jennifer noticed Gloria almost immediately. "And this must be the famous babysitter." Gloria blinked. "Famous. Alec has mentioned you every time I visited this week." Lucille gave Jennifer a brief look.
I'm Janita.
"Gloria." They shook hands. "So, you're studying?" "Yes, law." Jennifer nodded. "I always imagined law students looked more exhausted." "Give it another month." Jennifer laughed. Lucille picked up the folder she'd brought home from campus. "I need to finish reviewing a manuscript before tomorrow." Jennifer waved her away. "We'll survive without you for half an hour." Lucille hesitated. Her eyes shifted briefly toward Gloria. Then she gave a small nod. "I won't be long." As she disappeared toward her home office, Jennifer watched the doorway close behind her. Only then did she look back at Gloria. "So." She folded her arms comfortably. "Tell me." "Tell you what?" "What convinced a law student to become my friend's babysitter?" Gloria smiled. "It started with Alec." Jennifer noticed the slight pause before the answer. She smiled to herself, but didn't say anything, and just let the conversation move on. The following Tuesday arrived with steady rain. By the time Lucille returned home, droplets clung to the sleeves of her black blazer. She handed her umbrella to a maid before stepping into the living room. The house was unusually quiet. "Alec," she called. "Library," his voice answered from somewhere deeper inside the house. Lucille followed the sound. The small library overlooked the back garden, where rain traced uneven paths across the windows. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, broken only by 2 armchairs and a low wooden table. Alec lay on the rug with a puzzle spread in front of him. Gloria sat nearby, a novel resting open in her hands. She looked up when Lucille entered. "I finished it yesterday. And I've been thinking about it all day." Lucille placed her folder on the table. "That's usually a good sign." Gloria hesitated. She had replayed the question in her mind more than once while reading. Now that Lucille was standing in front of her, it suddenly felt strangely personal. "Can I ask you something?" "You can." "In your stories." She searched for the right words. "People don't seem to fall in love because the other person is perfect. They don't. They fall in love while disagreeing, while misunderstanding each other, while making mistakes." Lucille leaned one shoulder lightly against the bookshelf. "They're people." "I know." Gloria smiled. "I just don't see that very often." Lucille was quiet for a moment. When stories only show the beautiful parts of love, readers begin expecting people to love that way. And they don't. They try. Lucille's voice remained calm. Then they're disappointed when reality refuses to cooperate. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Gloria looked down at the cover of the novel. "So, you think love is supposed to hurt?" Lucille considered the question. "I think caring about someone always carries the possibility of pain." She spoke without hesitation. "As soon as another person matters enough, they gain the ability to hurt you." Gloria thought about that. "My roommate would disagree. She's allowed to." A smile touched Gloria's lips. "I don't know if I agree with you either." "I wasn't trying to convince you." Their eyes met briefly. For the first time, Gloria had the feeling they weren't talking only about fiction anymore. Before either of them could say anything else, footsteps approached. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, shaking rain from a folded umbrella. "I chose the worst possible weather to visit." Lucille looked toward her. "You still came." Jennifer's attention drifted to the novel in Gloria's hands. At that time, Lucille's phone rang, and she looked once at Gloria before leaving the library. "I'll be right back." The room grew quieter after she disappeared. Jennifer watched Gloria absent-mindedly run a thumb across the edge of the book. "You really like her writing." "I love it," Gloria said, looking toward the hallway where Lucille had gone. "She's always been good at putting feelings into words." Jennifer started before pausing for a bit. "Living them, on the other hand, has never come as easily." Gloria looked up. Jennifer met her eyes, then reached for the teapot a maid had just placed on the table. The conversation drifted naturally to other things, but the thought lingered quietly in Gloria's mind. Living them has never come as easily. She wondered what had happened to make someone who wrote so beautifully about love keep it so carefully at arm's length. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither Gloria nor Lucille talked about. Twice a week, Gloria arrived at the mansion just before noon. Some afternoons Lucille was already leaving for the university when Gloria arrived. Other days they crossed paths at the front door, exchanging only a few words before going their separate ways. Those conversations rarely lasted longer than 5 minutes. Yet they became something Gloria found herself looking forward to. One afternoon, Gloria found herself shelving a novel after Alec had wandered off to build a castle out of cushions. A loose sheet slipped from between the pages. She bent to pick it up. It was a handwritten draft. Several lines had been crossed out before the paragraph continued in neat black ink. She had barely read 2 sentences when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I've been looking for that." Gloria turned so quickly the page almost slipped from her hand.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to apologize. Lucille walked over and accepted the paper. I leave pieces of manuscripts everywhere. You write by hand first? Lucille glanced down at the page.
Yes.
It forces me to slow down. Gloria smiled. I think I understand. Lucille folded the paper once before slipping it into the folder she carried. Do you? When I read too quickly, I miss things. Lucille looked at her for a quiet moment. Most people do. Neither of them said anything after that, as they settled in a comfortable silence. Alec came calling for Gloria and she hurried after him, leaving Lucille standing beside the bookshelf. Lucille watched her go longer than she intended. Her eyes drifted toward the garden where Gloria was helping Alec hang paper birds from the branches of a small tree. She couldn't help but smile at the scene in front of her. The house has been different lately. Warm and lively, and there's a part of her that hoped for it to be that way forever. The following Friday, Lucille left for the university earlier than usual. A publishing deadline had been moved forward, leaving a manuscript spread across her office desk and little time to finish reviewing it at home. Before leaving, she found Gloria helping Alex zip up a light jacket for the garden. There's fresh cookie dough in the refrigerator, Lucille said as she picked up her bag. If he asks, you have my permission. Alec looked up hopefully. You heard that, Gloria? I knew you were listening. He grinned. Lucille's eyes shifted to Gloria. I shouldn't be back too late. Gloria nodded. We'll be fine. For a moment, Lucille looked as though she wanted to say something else. Instead, she simply left. The smell of warm butter filled the kitchen an hour later. Alec wandered off somewhere in the house when the doorbell rang. One of the maids answered it. Jennifer stepped inside carrying a canvas tote over one shoulder. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Gloria said. A maid led her to the sitting room while tea was prepared. Their conversation began with ordinary things. Jennifer asked how Gloria was balancing babysitting with law school. Gloria admitted midterm season was approaching. Jennifer laughed when Gloria described surviving on coffee during exam weeks. You'll fit right in with every lawyer I've ever met. I was hoping for a more glamorous future. I'm afraid reality rarely cooperates. Gloria smiled. I'm starting to notice that. Jennifer glanced toward the hallway where Alec had disappeared. He seems happier these days. He's easy to be around. He wasn't always. Gloria looked up. Jennifer rested her teacup on its saucer. There was a period after Lucille's separation when he stopped talking much. He was too young to understand why everything had changed. He only understood that it had. Gloria listened without interrupting. Lucille never let him see her fall apart, Jennifer continued. She always waited until he was asleep. I've never asked what happened, Gloria said. She doesn't like to talk about it. Jennifer smiled faintly. Silence settled between them. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked another quarter hour. Gloria's gaze drifted toward the bookshelf across the room. One of Lucille's novels rested there. Jennifer noticed. I can see you're obsessed with her stories,
Jennifer said.
I love her writing style, Gloria said, and she went on and on about it. But mostly she was talking about Lucille. Jennifer remained quiet. She had expected Gloria to talk about the stories. Instead, she had talked about Lucille. Not once had she referred to the novels without somehow circling back to the woman who wrote them. Jennifer had seen that look before. It rarely ended simply. She chose her next words carefully. Gloria. What is it? Can I give you one piece of advice? Of course. Jennifer held her gaze. Don't confuse fiction with reality. The words landed gently. Not as a warning. As concern. Gloria frowned slightly. I don't think I understand. Lucille writes beautifully about love. Jennifer smiled, though there was sadness behind it. She always has. Her fingers tightened slightly around the warm teacup. But writing about love and believing you deserve it are two very different things. Gloria lowered her eyes. She thought back to the novels,
To the interviews.
to every quiet conversation she'd had with Lucille. For the first time, she wondered whether the woman who wrote about imperfect love believed any of those words could apply to herself. Before she could ask another question, Alec came running into the room holding a tray of slightly uneven cookies. They're ready. Jennifer's expression softened immediately. They smell wonderful. Alec proudly held the tray between them. The conversation dissolved as naturally as it had begun. But Jennifer's words remained with Gloria long after the cookies had disappeared. The weekend passed more quickly than Gloria expected. Between lectures, reading assignments, and another shift at the mansion, Jennifer's words kept returning to her at odd moments. Don't confuse fiction with reality. She understood what Jennifer had meant. Or, at least she thought she did. Admiring someone's writing was one thing. Thinking you understood the person behind it was another. Still, every time she remembered Lucille, it wasn't a passage from one of the novels that came to mind. It was the way Lucille bent slightly to listen whenever Alex spoke. The way she thanked the house staff by name. The way she never seemed to rush a conversation, no matter how busy she looked. Those things hadn't come from a book. They had come from watching her. Tuesday afternoon brought clear skies after 2 days of rain. Gloria arrived at the mansion just before 1 o'clock. Before she could ring the bell, the front door opened. Lucille stood there with a leather satchel over one shoulder. For a second, both of them looked faintly surprised. I was just leaving. Yeah, I noticed. Lucille stepped aside to let her in. I'm teaching this afternoon. Gloria nodded. She had taken only a few steps into the entrance hall before Lucille spoke again. Gloria. She turned. I finished revising that manuscript. The one you kept losing pages from? A quiet smile appeared. I finally found the missing page.
I'm glad.
So am I. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Gloria found herself waiting for Lucille to say something else. Lucille seemed to be doing exactly the same thing. Instead, footsteps echoed down the staircase. Gloria. Alec bounded toward them with a backpack hanging from one shoulder. The moment dissolved naturally. Lucille rested a hand on Alec's shoulder. I'll be home around 5. Alec nodded. Okay. Lucille looked back at Gloria. Have a good afternoon. You too. She watched Lucille walk out through the front door. A moment later, the sound of a car faded beyond the gates. Gloria let out a slow breath and turned to Alec. By the time Lucille returned, the late afternoon sun stretched long bands of light across the living room floor. Homework books had been packed away. Alec was in the garden chasing something. Gloria stood near one of the bookshelves, absent-mindedly reading the back cover of a novel while she waited for him to return. So, do you always read the ending before starting the story? Lucille's voice came from behind her, amused. I wasn't reading the ending, just back cover. Lucille's eyes held hers for a moment, Then she stepped closer to place a book on the shelf above Gloria's shoulder. Neither of them realized they had reached for the same space until their hands brushed lightly. The contact lasted no more than a second. Gloria pulled her hand back first. "You are back early today," said Gloria, looking at anything but Lucille. Alec came running in through the open garden doors, hugging his mother while talking about almost everything. Gloria watched the easy exchange between mother and son before turning back toward the bookshelf. Jennifer's warning returned without invitation. Don't confuse fiction with reality. She looked at Lucille, who was patiently helping Alec unfold the bent paper airplane. There it was again. The problem. She wasn't thinking about Lucille because of the novels anymore. If anything, she had started reading the novels because of Lucille. The realization settled quietly inside her. It should have made her take a step back. Instead, it made that step feel much harder than she expected. The next Wednesday, Gloria arrived 10 minutes earlier than usual. She realized it only after checking the time outside the mansion gates. "I guess I misjudged the walk." The excuse sounded unconvincing even to herself. The maid welcomed her inside, as she always did. "Professor Lucille is in the kitchen." Gloria thanked her and made her way through the familiar hallway. She slowed when she reached the doorway. Lucille stood by the counter, pouring hot water into a teapot. The sleeves of her cream blouse were rolled neatly to her forearms, and her black blazer rested over the back of a nearby chair instead of her shoulders. For a moment, Gloria simply watched. It was the first time she had seen Lucille before she had fully stepped into the role of professor. She looked quieter, less guarded. Lucille glanced up. "You came early." "I did." Gloria smiled, a little embarrassed. "I thought I was on time." "You are." Lucille looked at the clock. "I'm the one leaving late." Gloria stepped into the kitchen. The scent of tea leaves drifted through the warm room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Lucille reached for another cup. Gloria hesitated. "I don't want to delay you." "You won't." She poured a second cup and placed it on the table. Gloria accepted it with a quiet thank you. For a while, they drank in comfortable silence. The windows overlooked the back garden, where a light breeze stirred the leaves. Gloria wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "I've started looking forward to Wednesdays." The words slipped out before she had time to weigh them. She immediately wished she had. Lucille looked at her. "For Alec." Gloria felt a tiny sting of disappointment. She smiled anyway. "He's good company." "He'll be happy to hear that." Lucille set her cup down. "I should leave." She stood, reached for the black blazer, and slipped it on with practiced ease. The familiar image returned almost instantly. Professor Lucille, composed, elegant, difficult to read. Gloria found herself missing the version from a moment ago. Lucille picked up her satchel before pausing near the doorway. "I almost forgot." She looked back. "I spoke to the gardener yesterday." Gloria blinked. The lilies near the east fence have started blooming. It took Gloria a second to understand why Lucille had mentioned them. Weeks ago, during an ordinary conversation, Gloria had casually said lilies were her favorite flowers. "I thought you might like to see them before you leave this afternoon." For a moment, Gloria simply stared at her. Then she smiled. "I'd like that." Lucille gave a small nod. "So would I." The words seemed to surprise Lucille as much as they surprised Gloria. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She recovered almost immediately. I mean, they only bloom for a short time. I know what you meant. Lucille held her gaze for the briefest moment before looking away. I'll see you later, Gloria. After she left, the kitchen became noticeably quieter. Gloria remained where she was, her tea growing cooler between her hands. She replayed the conversation without meaning to. She smiled to herself before finishing the last sip of tea and heading in search of Alec. Outside, the front gate opened. Lucille drove toward the university. At the first traffic light, her thoughts drifted unexpectedly back to the kitchen. She tightened her hands slightly on the steering wheel. Why had she mentioned the lilies? It had seemed perfectly reasonable while they were talking. Now it felt strangely personal. The light turned green and she drove on. The question stayed with her all the way to campus. Spring settled over the city almost without anyone noticing. The afternoons grew warmer, and the lilies along the eastern fence opened one by one until they formed a quiet line of white beneath the trees. The days settled into a rhythm that no longer felt unfamiliar. Their conversations remained short. They also became easier, and Gloria wasn't the only one looking forward to it. One evening, Gloria realized she had started measuring Wednesdays differently. Not by her classes. Not by her babysitting hours. But by how long she and Lucille had managed to talk before one of them needed to leave. The realization made her smile. It also made her uneasy. Jennifer's voice returned to her again. Don't confuse fiction with reality. Gloria closed her book. She wasn't. That was exactly what frightened her. The following Wednesday, Gloria didn't come. She had told Lucille 3 days earlier that she'll be having exam. Lucille had replied a few minutes later, with good luck. The house felt unusually still when she returned from campus. She placed her satchel by the staircase and listened. No laughter drifted in from the garden. No quiet conversation came from the living room. Only the distant ticking of the grandfather clock reached her from the hallway. She loosened the scarf around her neck as she walked inside. Alex sat on the rug surrounded by colored pencils. He looked up. Hello, Mom. Lucille glanced around almost instinctively before realizing what she was doing. She looked back at Alec. Did you have a good day? He nodded. Mrs. Harris played board games with me. Alec chose another blue pencil. When is Gloria coming back? Next week. He accepted the answer with the ease only children seemed capable of. Okay. Lucille smiled faintly. I'll draw with you today. You? He looked genuinely surprised. I can draw. She sat beside him on the rug. For the next 20 minutes, they filled a page with crooked houses, oversized clouds, and birds that refused to resemble birds. Alex studied her drawing. It's better than last time. I appreciate the honesty. He grinned. You sound like Gloria. The room became quiet again. Lucille looked down at the pencil in her hand. She hadn't realized how often Gloria's name had become part of the house until it echoed through a conversation she hadn't even expected to have. After dinner, Alec disappeared upstairs to take his bath. Lucille carried a mug of tea into the small library. Rain clouds gathered outside, dimming the last of the evening light. She picked up the novel she had been reading earlier that week. She began reading, but couldn't bring herself to focus. She ended up reading the same paragraph over and over. The words blurred together once more. With a quiet sigh, she closed the book. Her eyes wandered toward the empty armchair opposite her. Most Wednesdays, Gloria sat there with a novel while waiting for Alec to finish whatever game he had started.
Sometimes they talked.
Sometimes they didn't. Lucille had never thought much about those afternoons. Not until one failed to happen. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. It was only for a while. Gloria would be back next week. There was no reason for the house to feel unfamiliar because of that. Then, almost impatiently, she stood and switched off the library lamp. She refused to believe an empty chair could unsettle her. Yet somehow it had. Gloria returned the following Wednesday. She arrived just after noon, brushing a few loose strands of hair behind her ear as the maid opened the front door. "I hope I didn't keep everyone waiting. Alec has been asking what time you'd arrive since breakfast," the maid said, smiling as she stepped aside. "He's in the garden." Gloria thanked her and headed toward the back of the house. She had almost reached the glass doors when another voice stopped her. "How was your exam?" She turned. Lucille had just come down the staircase, a folder tucked beneath one arm. Gloria blinked, and for a moment, she simply looked at her. "It was good. I was well prepared." "Congratulations." A small smile appeared on Lucille's face, and a warm feeling settled in Gloria's chest. "Thank you." Lucille gave a small nod. That afternoon passed quietly. Alec insisted on teaching Gloria a card game whose rules seemed to change whenever he began losing. That night, while getting ready for bed, Lucille caught herself thinking about Gloria's exam again. She frowned at her own reflection. It wasn't unusual to remember details about people. At least, that was what she told herself before switching off the bedroom light. Friday arrived with bright skies and a warm breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the open windows of the mansion. Gloria was helping Alec put away a box of colored pencils when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," one of the maids called. A few moments later, Lucille walked into the living room with a large paper bag resting against one hip. "You came back early," Gloria said. "My last meeting was canceled." Lucille set the bag on the coffee table. "I stopped by the bookstore." Gloria looked up. "The owner had been holding these for me." Lucille opened the bag, revealing several newly printed novels. Alec immediately reached inside. "Can I have one?" Lucille smiled. "When you're old enough to read it." "I can read." "You can." She gently took the book back from his hands. "But perhaps not this one." Alec accepted the answer surprisingly well and wandered off toward the garden with a football tucked under his arm. His footsteps faded outside. The room grew quieter. Gloria's eyes lingered on the stack of books. "Congratulations for publishing another book." Lucille looked at her. "It still feels strange hearing people say that." Gloria reached for the top copy. "May I?" Lucille nodded. Gloria turned the book over carefully, reading the back cover before opening the first page. The dedication caught her attention. "For those who stayed when leaving would have been easier." Without thinking, she asked quietly, "Is this one personal?" Lucille didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window instead, looking out toward the garden where Alec chased the football across the lawn. "They all are." There was nothing dramatic about the reply. Gloria closed the book gently. "I suppose that's why they feel real." Lucille turned back toward her. "Do they?" "They do." For a moment, neither spoke. Gloria wondered whether she had crossed into territory that was too personal. Lucille seemed to be weighing something in silence. Finally, she said, "Would you like to borrow it before it's in the bookstores?" Gloria looked up. "You trust me with the first copy?" "I wouldn't have offered if I didn't." Something warm spread through Gloria's chest. I'll take good care of it. I know. The confidence in Lucille's voice caught Gloria off guard. She traced a thumb lightly over the book's cover. She knew she wasn't confusing fiction with reality. This wasn't about novels anymore. That realization frightened her enough that she slipped the book into her bag almost immediately. Lucille noticed. You don't have to hide it. Gloria let out a small laugh. I'm hiding it from myself. Lucille tilted her head, amused. I'm not sure I understand. I don't either. The answer escaped before Gloria could stop it. For a brief second, she wished she could take it back. Lucille didn't ask what she meant. She simply watched Gloria with quiet curiosity. The silence stretched comfortably between them until Gloria stood. I should check on Alec. She stepped into the garden before the conversation could go any further. Lucille remained by the window. She watched Gloria jog across the lawn as Alec waved the football triumphantly over his head. Without realizing it, Lucille smiled. Several days slipped by. With each passing week, the routine between Gloria and the Hart household settled a little more naturally into place. One afternoon, Gloria mentioned that returning to the mansion before taking Alec to the park meant walking the same route twice. Lucille considered it for a moment before suggesting another arrangement. If it was more convenient after Gloria's classes, she could take Alec to her apartment for the afternoon instead. Lucille would pick him up there after work. The suggestion surprised Gloria. It meant Lucille trusted her so much. The first afternoon, Lucille called once to ask whether Alec had eaten lunch. The second one, she only sent a short message. By the third, the calls stopped altogether. Trust had quietly replaced caution. The apartment was small compared to the mansion, but it filled with an easy warmth as the weeks passed. One Thursday afternoon, heavy clouds gathered over the city long before sunset. By the time Gloria and Alec reached her apartment after classes, the rain had settled into a steady rhythm against the rooftops. Gloria unlocked the door, and Alec slipped inside ahead of her, already making himself at home. She smiled to herself as she hung her jacket by the entrance. I'll make us something before your mom gets here. Alec nodded before wandering toward the living room with his sketchbook tucked beneath one arm. Gloria changed into a loose sweater, tied her hair back, and stepped into the kitchen. The apartment carried the familiar scent of coffee from that morning, now blending with the fresh smell of rain drifting through the slightly open window above the sink. She had just filled a pot with water when someone knocked. Gloria dried her hands and walked to the door. Lucille stood outside beneath a black umbrella. The rain had dampened a few loose strands of hair near her temple, though the rest of her looked as composed as ever. A long black blazer fell neatly over her shoulders, and a leather satchel rested against her side. I'm a little earlier than usual, she said. Gloria stepped aside.
Come in.
Lucille folded the umbrella before entering. The quiet sound of rain followed her in. The moment Alex spotted her, he hurried across the room and wrapped his arms around her waist. Lucille's expression softened immediately. She rested a hand gently on his head before looking toward Gloria. Was he any trouble? Gloria smiled. Not even a little. Lucille glanced toward the window. Sheets of rain blurred the buildings across the street. I'll wait until it eases. I don't think it'll stop anytime soon. Lucille watched the rain for another moment before giving a small nod. It seems you're right. Gloria returned to the kitchen. I was about to make noodles. I can help. Gloria looked over her shoulder and smiled. I've seen your schedule. Lucille raised an eyebrow. And You've earned a break. Go spend time with Alec. For a second, Lucille looked as though she might insist. Instead, she closed the distance to the living room. Alec had already spread paper, colored pencils, and half-finished drawings across the coffee table. Gloria listened as she rinsed vegetables beneath running water. Alec's quiet excitement drifted in from the next room. Lucille's voice answered now and then, calm and unhurried. The sounds blended naturally with the rain tapping against the windows. When she carried the bowls to the table a little while later, she paused at the doorway. Lucille sat cross-legged on the rug beside Alec. One sleeve of her blazer had been pushed back. A colored pencil rested awkwardly between her fingers as Alec patiently pointed at something on the page. Lucille listened with complete attention. Then she drew another careful line. Alec grinned and Lucille smiled back. The sight caught Gloria off guard. She had seen Lucille smile before. She had never seen her this relaxed. For one impossible moment, Gloria wished she could stop time exactly where it was. Just long enough to remember every detail. Lucille looked up and their eyes met. Dinner's ready. Lucille stood, brushing an invisible crease from her blazer. They ate together by the window while the rain continued to fall. Conversation came easily, but never lingered too long. Mostly it circled around Alec's drawings, Gloria's classes, and Lucille's latest manuscript. Between those moments, silence settled comfortably over the table. By the time they finished eating, the room had grown noticeably dimmer. Alec rubbed one eye, and a few minutes later, he leaned against Lucille's shoulder. His eyelids grew heavier with every passing moment. Gloria smiled as gathered the empty bowls. You can put him on my bed until the rain settles. Lucille nodded. I'll bring him back once he wakes. Gloria carried the dishes into the kitchen. The sound of running water soon mixed with the steady rain outside. For a few peaceful moments, the apartment held nothing more than the ordinary comfort of a shared afternoon. None of them knew it was about to change. Lucille adjusted Alec carefully against her shoulder. He stirred only slightly before settling again, his breathing slow and even. I'll be back in a moment, she said quietly. Gloria looked up from the sink. Take your time. She turned back to the dishes. Warm water flowed over her hands as she stacked the bowls beside the sink. Behind her, she heard Lucille's measured footsteps disappear down the short hallway. The apartment became unusually quiet. Gloria reached for another plate. Then she stopped. My notebook. A small knot formed in her stomach. She had left it open on the bed, and she had written things she didn't want Lucille to see. The plate slipped from her fingers. It struck the edge of the sink with a sharp clang before dropping into the basin. Without bothering to dry her hands, she hurried out of the kitchen. Lucille. Lucille stood beside the bed. Alec was already asleep beneath the blanket, one small hand resting outside the covers. In Lucille's hands was the open notebook. She looked up immediately with an unreadable expression. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Rain tapped gently against the bedroom window. Lucille lowered the notebook at once. I'm sorry. Her voice was softer than Gloria had ever heard it. I didn't know it was a diary. Gloria couldn't feel her hands anymore. She walked forward slowly, afraid that moving too quickly might somehow make everything more real. It's all right. The words came out steadier than she expected. She reached for the notebook. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment as Lucille let go. Gloria closed the diary immediately without looking at it. The silence that followed was unlike any they had shared before. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't awkward. It was simply heavy. Lucille looked once toward the sleeping Alec before turning back to Gloria. The rain has almost stopped. Gloria glanced toward the window. She hadn't even noticed. A thin strip of evening light had begun to break through the clouds. I think I should take Alec home. Gloria nodded. I'll get his jacket. You don't have to. Lucille bent carefully and lifted Alec into her arms. He barely stirred. She adjusted the blanket around his shoulders before walking toward the front door. Gloria followed a few steps behind. At the doorway, Lucille reached for the handle. Then she paused. Without turning around, she said quietly, I'll see you later, Gloria. She hesitated again. And it's getting cold outside. This time she looked back. Remember to wear your jacket if you go out. Lucille held her gaze for a brief second before opening the door. Cool air drifted into the apartment. The rain had faded to a light drizzle. A moment later, she was gone. The sound of her footsteps disappeared down the stairwell. Gloria remained where she was. The apartment suddenly felt much larger than it had an hour earlier. She looked down at the notebook still clutched tightly against her chest. A slow breath escaped her. The strength she'd been holding together quietly gave way. Her knees buckled. She sank onto the floor beside the doorway, pressing the notebook against herself as if she could somehow hide it now. She buried her face in her hands. For the first time since she had seen Lucille standing beside the bed, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. That night, sleep refused to come. Lucille lay on her back, staring at the ceiling above her bed while the last traces of rain tapped against the windows. The bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp in the hallway outside. Her thoughts returned to Gloria's apartment as naturally as breathing. She remembered carrying Alec into the bedroom. She had noticed the novel lying open across the bed and reached for it without thinking. The notebook beneath it had caught her attention. She had meant to move it aside. Then she had seen her own name written neatly in the margin. Curiosity had won before she could stop herself. She hadn't read very far. She hadn't needed to. The careful handwriting, small flowers sketched along the edges of the page. Then, the confession. Gloria had written that she thought she was falling in love with her. She had written that she caught herself looking forward to ordinary Wednesdays. That she liked conversations that lasted a little longer than they needed to. That she sometimes wished time would slow down whenever they were together. Lucille remembered standing beside the bed, unable to make sense of what she was reading. Before she had found the words to think, Gloria had appeared in the doorway. She could still see the color draining from Gloria's face. The panic. The embarrassment. The desperate effort to pretend everything was all right. Lucille turned onto her side. She reached toward the bedside table, where her phone rested. Her fingers closed around it. The screen lit the room with a pale glow as her thumb hovered over Gloria's name. What could she possibly say? I am sorry? That felt too small. Let's talk. About what? The silence in the room pressed in around her. For years, she had believed she understood complicated emotions. She had written novels about them. She had lectured on them. She had watched fictional characters make impossible choices. Yet tonight, faced with one honest confession from a real person, she found herself completely unprepared. She switched off the screen and set the phone back on the table. Sleep came long after midnight. Even then, it arrived only in restless fragments. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains far too soon. Lucille had already finished dressing when she caught her reflection in the mirror. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. By the time she reached the dining room, Breakfast had already been laid out. Alec climbed into his chair, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He reached for a slice of toast before looking up at his mother. "Is Gloria coming today?" Lucille poured herself a cup of coffee. "I'm not sure." Alec frowned slightly.
Why?
Lucille stirred the coffee without answering immediately. "It's been a busy week, Alec." She lifted the cup to her lips, but the first sip tasted unusually bitter. The conversation from yesterday hadn't happened. At least, that was what she kept trying to tell herself. Yet every time she thought of Gloria, she no longer pictured the easy smiles they had shared over tea or the quiet afternoons in the garden. She saw Gloria standing in the bedroom doorway, motionless, trying very hard not to fall apart. A knock sounded at the dining room door. One of the maids stepped inside. "Miss Gloria is here." Lucille's hand paused around the handle of her cup. Before she could respond, Alec jumped down from his chair and hurried toward the entrance. The sound of the front door opening echoed faintly through the hallway. Then came Alec's delighted laugh. Lucille remained seated for another second. Only then did she stand and walk toward the dining room entrance. Gloria had just stepped inside. She wore her usual jacket despite the clear morning, and her backpack still hung over one shoulder as though she had come straight from campus. For the first time since they had met, Gloria didn't look up when she greeted Lucille. "I'm sorry I didn't call." Her voice was polite and careful. Lucille studied her for a brief moment before pulling out a chair at the table. "Come and have breakfast with us." Gloria hesitated, then she nodded. "Thank you." Alec carried the conversation almost by himself, speaking between mouthfuls of toast while Gloria smiled and listened. Whenever Lucille asked a question, Gloria answered gently, but her eyes remained fixed on her plate. Not once did they meet Lucille's. The silence between their words said more than the conversation ever could. Lucille felt it with every passing minute. She found herself wishing, with surprising intensity, for breakfast to feel ordinary again. Breakfast ended more slowly than it usually did. The maid cleared away the last of the plates while Alec hurried outside after promising to finish a drawing he had started the day before. Gloria rose from her chair saying she'll go with him when Lucille called out to her. "Would you come upstairs for a moment?" Gloria hesitated only briefly before nodding. "All right." Neither of them spoke as they climbed the staircase. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows along the corridor, warming the polished wooden floor beneath their feet. Lucille led the way onto the balcony outside her study. The garden stretched below them, bright after yesterday's rain. Water still clung to the leaves, catching the morning light whenever the breeze stirred the branches. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Gloria rested both hands on the balcony railing. She watched the garden instead of the woman standing beside her. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times during the past 3 days. None of those rehearsals had made it easier. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Lucille turned to look at her. "For what?" "For putting you in that position." Gloria forced herself to continue before she lost the courage. "I never wanted you to find out like that." Gloria drew a slow breath. "Can we please forget about what you saw the other day?" Lucille's fingers rested lightly against the balcony rail. "How do I forget that?" There was no cruelty in her voice. Only genuine uncertainty. Gloria let out a nervous laugh that disappeared almost as soon as it came. "We can pretend it wasn't your name." Lucille tilted her head slightly, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Wouldn't it be easier to pretend you have another friend called Lucille?" Despite everything, Gloria laughed. "You know what? She shook her head. We can go with that. The tension between them loosened just enough for both of them to breathe again. For a moment, it almost felt like before. Gloria looked toward the garden. I should go downstairs. Alex probably wondering where I disappeared to. She took a step toward the door. Gloria. She stopped but didn't turn around. Lucille searched for words that refused to come easily. She wanted to reassure her. She wanted to undo the shame she had seen in Gloria's eyes that rainy afternoon. Instead, she reached for the only truth she believed she understood. Things come and go. Just give it time. Lucille's voice remained calm. What feels overwhelming today won't always feel that way. Silence settled between them. Gloria lowered her eyes. She understood exactly what Lucille meant. Or, at least, she thought she did. To Lucille, these feelings would pass. They were something to outgrow. Something to leave behind. A small ache settled quietly in her chest. She nodded once. I understand. Her voice was gentle enough that nothing seemed wrong. She opened the balcony door and walked back into the house. Lucille remained where she was. The breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the garden below. She watched the door close behind Gloria and let out a slow breath. The conversation hadn't gone the way she had hoped. She wasn't entirely sure what she had hoped for. She only knew that Gloria's smile hadn't reached her eyes. And that troubled her more. Left alone on the balcony, Lucille's thoughts drifted somewhere she had spent years avoiding. She remembered another apartment. Another rainy evening. She remembered sitting on the edge of a bed long after someone else had walked away, unable to stop the tears that came no matter how fiercely she tried to hold them back. She remembered promising herself that she would never give another person that kind of power over her. Love had not made her happier. It had left her broken. The memory faded as quickly as it had come. Lucille straightened, pressing both hands against the cool stone railing. She had done the right thing. Gloria needed time. Time would make this easier. It always did. The days that followed settled into a different rhythm. Gloria still arrived on time. She still greeted the maids with the same easy smile. She still knelt to help Alec tie his shoelaces before they left for the park or her apartment. None of that changed. Only one thing did. Whenever Lucille was home, Gloria found a reason to leave a little sooner. If Lucille returned from the university earlier than expected, Gloria was already helping Alec put on his jacket. If Lucille stepped into the living room carrying a cup of tea, Gloria was gathering her books. Their conversations, once unhurried, became brief enough to fit between opening and closing the front door. At first, Lucille assumed it was coincidence. Law students had demanding schedules. Gloria had mentioned examinations before. There was no reason to think otherwise. Yet the pattern continued. One afternoon, Lucille came home nearly an hour earlier than usual after a faculty meeting had been canceled. She found Gloria had already left. She climbed the stairs to change out of her work clothes. Halfway to her bedroom, she stopped. There was no reason for the house to feel quieter simply because Gloria had left. She continued upstairs without letting herself think about it any further. Days turned into another week. The distance between them became impossible to ignore. Lucille noticed it in small ways. Gloria no longer lingered over tea before leaving. When they happened to meet in the hallway, Gloria smiled warmly, yet her feet never stopped moving. Lucille tried once or twice to begin longer conversations. They never lasted. Each time, Lucille was left standing exactly where the conversation had ended. She couldn't remember when speaking to Gloria had become so difficult. Late Saturday afternoon, sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the living room. The house was unusually peaceful. Lucille sat on the sofa with a book resting open in her lap. She had been staring at the same page for several minutes without turning it. Across from her, Alex sat on the rug with a box of colored pencils scattered around him. He hummed quietly as he drew. Every so often, he leaned back to study his work before adding another careful line. Lucille tried to return her attention to the novel. Instead, her thoughts wandered to the balcony conversation she had with Gloria. "Mom." Lucille looked up. Alec held up his drawing with both hands. "What do you think?" She closed the book and set it beside her. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath an oversized sun. One was unmistakably Alec. The second had long dark hair and a denim jacket. The third stood taller than the others, wearing what looked remarkably like a long black blazer. Lucille smiled despite herself. "You've been paying attention." Alex smiled. Her eyes drifted back to the figure in the denim jacket. "Gloria looks beautiful." Alec nodded as though that had been obvious from the beginning. Then Alec reached for another pencil. "Does Gloria like roses?" Lucille looked at him.
No.
"She likes lilies." Alec continued coloring without looking up. A man brought her flowers. Something tightened quietly inside Lucille's chest, though she kept her expression calm. "What man?" "The delivery man." Alec switched to a green pencil. He smiled when he gave them to her. Lucille looked down at the drawing again. The page blurred for the briefest moment. "Did Gloria say who they were from?" Alec shook his head. "I don't know." He went back to coloring as though the conversation had ended. Lucille tried to return to her book, but just couldn't bring herself to focus. A delivery of flowers. It shouldn't mean anything. People received flowers every day. The room suddenly felt warmer than it had a moment ago. Alex spoke again, his attention never leaving the drawing. "I like Gloria." Lucille smiled faintly. "I know." Alec looked up asking, "Do you like Gloria?" The question settled between them with surprising weight. Her gaze drifted toward the window where the late afternoon light spilled across the garden. She thought of Gloria laughing in the kitchen, reading by the window, avoiding her eyes at breakfast. Somewhere along the way, Gloria had become woven into the quiet rhythm of her days. She hadn't noticed when it happened. Only the empty space left behind whenever Gloria walked away. Lucille lowered her eyes to the drawing still resting in Alec's lap. "Yes," she said softly. "I like Gloria." She let out a slow breath. Probably too much. Alex smiled, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his drawing without another question. Outside, the breeze stirred the lilies along the eastern fence. She watched them sway gently until they disappeared into a blur. For the first time, she allowed herself to name the feeling she had been trying so hard to explain away. It wasn't simple affection. It wasn't gratitude. And it certainly wasn't habit. It was love. The realization did not bring relief. It brought fear. The same fear she had sworn, years ago, never to feel again. The days that followed offered Lucille every opportunity to convince herself she had been mistaken. She accepted more committee meetings at the university. She spent longer hours in her study after coming home. She even reopened a manuscript she had abandoned months earlier, hoping work would occupy the parts of her mind that refused to stay still. None of it worked. Whenever she finished one task, her thoughts returned to Gloria. She wondered whether Gloria had eaten lunch, whether she had done well in class. Monday morning arrived with clear skies. Lucille's first lecture began at 9. Literature had always demanded her complete attention. Today, it didn't. She wrote a passage from one of the assigned novels across the board before turning to her students. What does the author suggest about fear? Several hands rose, and Lucille listened carefully to each answer. Then one student said, "Sometimes fear isn't about what happens. It's about what we think might happen." Lucille stood still for a moment. Her gaze lingered on the sentence she had written across the board. Without warning, Gloria's face entered her mind, standing frozen in the bedroom doorway with that diary pressed against her chest. Lucille finished the discussion, but something about the student's answer stayed with her for the rest of the day. Fear wasn't always born from loss. Sometimes it came from the possibility of losing someone before they were ever yours. That evening, Jennifer stopped by with a draft of Lucille's newest manuscript. She found Lucille sitting on the veranda overlooking the garden instead of working in her study. Jennifer handed over the pages before taking the chair opposite her, chatting for a while. She noticed that Lucille was absent-minded and gently asked, "You seem troubled lately. Is it work?" Lucille did not answer. "It isn't, is it?" The breeze carried the scent of the lilies blooming along the eastern fence. Lucille followed it with her eyes. "No, it's not." She drew a slow breath. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." It was the first honest sentence she had spoken about Gloria. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. She had known Lucille long enough to recognize the difference between uncertainty and avoidance. The garden lay quiet beyond the veranda. A gardener trimmed the hedges near the fountain, and somewhere farther away a bird called once before settling into silence again. "You've fallen for her." Lucille let out a quiet breath. "I know." Saying the words aloud made them feel heavier. Jennifer remained silent for a moment. "You loved someone, and it destroyed you. You are scared." Lucille looked down at her hands. "I promised myself I would never give another person that kind of power over me." Her voice had become quieter. "So, when Gloria told me..." She stopped, and Jennifer finished the sentence for her. "You got scared." Lucille nodded once. "I keep telling myself she'll move on." Jennifer watched her carefully. "And what if she does?" Lucille opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came. For the first time, she allowed herself to picture it. Gloria smiling at someone else. Sharing the easy conversations that had once belonged to them. Leaving the mansion one day and never coming back. The thought settled heavily in her chest. Jennifer saw the change in her eyes, and she didn't need an answer anymore. Very quietly, she reached across the small table and rested a hand over Lucille's. "You've been trying so hard not to get hurt," she said. Jennifer's voice softened even further. "But from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're hurting anyway." Jennifer's words lingered long after she had gone. Lucille carried her empty teacup into the kitchen, thanked the maid who offered to wash it, and climbed the stairs to her study. She tried to work. For nearly 20 minutes, the cursor blinked without a single sentence appearing beneath it. She closed the laptop. The room suddenly felt too quiet. This was becoming ridiculous. She had spent years building a life that was orderly and predictable. She knew when to work, when to write, when to rest. Now a single person had somehow unsettled all of it without even trying. A knock sounded on the half-open door as the maid stepped in, saying that Gloria is here. Lucille's heartbeat quickened before she could stop it. "I'll be down in a moment." By the time she reached the living room, Gloria had already helped Alec into his shoes. She looked up and offered the same warm smile she always did. "Alec mentioned he wanted to visit the lake," Gloria said. "I thought we'd go before it gets crowded." She reached for Alec's backpack, while he hurried toward the front door. Lucille watched her, before calling out to her. "Gloria?" Lucille searched for something ordinary to say. Something that would not sound like a request to stay. "Would you like some tea when you come back?" Gloria's expression softened with unmistakable surprise. For a brief second, Lucille thought she might say yes. "I am sorry." Gloria's smile carried genuine regret. "I promised Celine I'd help her prepare for a literature presentation this evening." "I understand. And it'll probably get late." "That's all right." The conversation had ended. Still, neither seemed ready to walk away first. Finally, Gloria adjusted the strap of her backpack. "I'll see you tomorrow." She left with Alec a moment later. The front door closed gently behind them. Lucille remained where she was. She stared at the empty doorway for several seconds before letting out a slow breath. It had only been an invitation to tea. So, why did the refusal leave such a quiet disappointment behind? She crossed the living room and stopped beside the window, overlooking the driveway. She watched until they disappeared from sight. Only then did she realize what Jennifer had meant. The pain she had been trying so hard to avoid was no longer something she feared might happen someday. It had already begun. She simply hadn't been willing to call it by its name. The following afternoon passed more quietly than most. Lucille had a stack of examination papers spread across her desk. Instead of marking them, she found herself wondering who had sent flowers to Gloria's apartment. A classmate? A friend? She stopped herself. Gloria's life outside the mansion belonged to Gloria. Yet the thought lingered. Someone had taken the time to choose flowers for Gloria. Someone had thought about her. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Not because of the bouquet itself. Because she had never once considered doing the same. She knew Gloria's favorite flower. She knew which novels made her lose track of time. She knew Gloria preferred tea when she studied and coffee when she was tired.
She knew all these small things.
And yet she had never allowed herself to act on any of them. She had been too busy convincing herself that distance was kindness. Now, she couldn't stop wondering whether someone else would step into the space she kept leaving empty. For the first time in years, Lucille found herself wishing she had acted sooner. The feeling unsettled her more than jealousy. That afternoon, Lucille's lecture ended earlier than expected. Students gathered their books as she erased the last notes from the board. "Professor?" Celine stood near the front of the lecture hall, notebook tucked against her chest. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." The other students gradually filtered out until only the two of them remained. "I wanted to ask about the essay feedback." Lucille explained a few comments she had written in the margins of Celine's paper. Celine listened attentively, nodding now and then. "That makes much more sense now." She closed the folder she had been carrying. There was a brief silence before Celine spoke again. "Professor?" Lucille looked up. "Can I ask you something a little personal?" "You can." Celine chose her words carefully. "Has something happened between you and Gloria?" Lucille's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the folder she was holding. Finally, she asked, "Has she said anything?" Celine shook her head. "No, she hasn't. She just seems sadder." The word landed more heavily than Lucille expected. When she gets home, she reads until she's too tired to keep her eyes open. Lucille lowered her gaze. "I am sorry. I probably shouldn't have." Lucille interrupted gently. "I'm glad you told me." Then Lucille thanked Celine for stopping by, and they left the lecture hall together. For the first time since their rainy afternoon, Lucille began to wonder whether doing nothing was truly the kinder choice, or whether it was simply the easier one. By the time she turned through the mansion gates, she had reached the same conclusion over and over. Avoiding the situation had solved nothing. It had only made every conversation shorter, every silence heavier. When she stepped inside, the house carried the familiar sounds of evening. A maid was setting the dining table. Somewhere upstairs, Alec laughed. Lucille followed the sound. She found him in the living room with Gloria. Sheets of paper covered the coffee table, and Alec was carefully coloring a picture while Gloria searched for a blue pencil that had rolled beneath the sofa. She looked up as Lucille entered. "Good evening." Their eyes met only briefly before Gloria returned her attention to the floor. "I found it." She held up the pencil triumphantly, making Alec grin. Lucille smiled despite herself. It was such an ordinary moment. Weeks ago, she would have joined them without a second thought. Now she remained standing by the doorway, uncertain of where she belonged. "Would you like to sit with us?" The invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to interrupt." "You're not." There was no hesitation in Gloria's answer. Lucille crossed the room and sat in the empty armchair beside them. For several minutes, only the quiet scratching of colored pencils filled the room. Alec concentrated on his drawing while Gloria shaded the corner of a tree after he asked for help. Lucille just watched them. She had missed simple moments like this more than she had realized. When Alec proudly announced that he had finished, he gathered his drawing and hurried upstairs to show one of the maids. Lucille rested her hands together. "I've missed talking to you." The words escaped before she could reconsider them. Gloria's hands paused as she kept her eyes on the pencils. "I know." Lucille hadn't expected that answer. "I wasn't trying to make things difficult. I just thought giving you space was the right thing to do," Gloria said as she closed the pencil box. Lucille felt a quiet ache settle inside her. "I never asked for space." Gloria smiled sadly. "You didn't have to." Lucille understood what Gloria meant. She remembered the words she told Gloria at the balcony. "Things come and go. Just give it time." She had intended those words as comfort. Gloria had received them as rejection. For the first time, Lucille saw the conversation as Gloria must have lived it. She drew a slow breath. "I don't think I chose my words very well." Lucille leaned forward slightly. "Would you let me make up for that?" Gloria looked at her with quiet surprise.
"How?"
"There is a restaurant I haven't visited in some time." She hesitated. "I was wondering if you would have dinner with me." Gloria blinked. The question caught her completely off guard. Lucille held her gaze, suddenly aware of how vulnerable the invitation sounded. "It doesn't have to be tonight," she added gently. "And you don't have to answer now." Gloria looked away for a moment. Her heart had begun beating much faster than she wanted to admit.
"Dinner."
Just the two of them. Every instinct reminded her of the words Lucille had spoken on the balcony. "Things come and go." She wasn't sure she could survive hoping again. She met Lucille's eyes once more. "I'll think about it." Lucille nodded. "That's all I'm asking." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was enough to keep hope alive a little longer. Gloria thought about the invitation for the rest of the evening. She was afraid of what saying yes might awaken again. She sat by the window of her apartment with a novel open across her lap. Celine, sitting a little further from her, looked up from her notes. You haven't turned a page in 10 minutes. Gloria smiled sheepishly. Was it that obvious? Celine set her pen down. Is this about Professor Hart? Gloria nodded. She asked me to have dinner with her. Celine was silent for a moment. And I told her I'd think about it. Do you want to go? I don't know. She let out a quiet breath. A part of me wants to go. The other part? Not so much. After a moment, Celine spoke. If you don't go because you're afraid of getting hurt, you'll always wonder what she wanted to say. Gloria looked outside again at the sky that had begun turning orange as the sun settled lower behind the buildings. What if nothing has changed? Then you'll know. Celine's voice remained gentle. And if something has? Gloria didn't answer. She wasn't sure she trusted herself to. The following afternoon, Gloria arrived at the mansion as usual. She had barely stepped through the front door when Lucille appeared from the hallway. For the first time in weeks, neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. Good afternoon, Gloria said. Good afternoon. Lucille searched Gloria's face without making it obvious. I hope I didn't put you in an uncomfortable position yesterday. You didn't. Gloria smiled faintly. I just needed time to think. Lucille nodded. There was a brief silence before Gloria spoke. I'd like to have dinner with you. Lucille blinked once, almost as though she hadn't expected the answer after all. I am glad, she said with a quiet smile. So am I. They shared an awkward laugh that eased some of the tension between them as Lucille's shoulders relaxed. I'll pick you up tomorrow evening, if that works for you. It does. 7. I'll be ready. Lucille watched her quietly from where she stood. It wasn't simply relief she felt. It was hope. Small enough that she was almost afraid to acknowledge it. For the first time since the rainy afternoon, tomorrow was no longer something she wanted to avoid. She found herself looking forward to it. The following evening arrived with clear skies. Gloria stood in front of the mirror fastening the buttons of a light cream blouse. She reached for a jacket out of habit, then paused. A small smile crossed her face. She folded it over her arm instead. A knock sounded at the apartment door. Celine looked up from the dining table. That must be her. Gloria nodded, suddenly aware of how quickly her heart had begun to beat. Lucille stood outside, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. She wore the black blazer Gloria had come to associate with her, though tonight it seemed less like a shield and more like part of the woman herself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lucille held out the flowers. Gloria looked at the lilies before looking back at her. You remembered. I know they're your favorite. A warmth spread quietly through Gloria's chest. She accepted the bouquet carefully. Thank you. They suit you better than roses. The remark escaped before Lucille had time to consider it. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. I suppose that sounded strange. Gloria laughed softly. A little. Lucille looked away with a faint shake of her head. I'm not very good at this. Gloria's smile softened. I have noticed. For the first time in days, the laughter they shared came easily. It stayed with them all the way to the car. The restaurant overlooked a quiet lake at the edge of the city. Warm lights reflected gently across the water beyond the windows, and low conversations blended with the soft music playing in the background. After they had ordered, a comfortable silence settled between them. Lucille rested her hands around the cup of tea the waiter had brought. I've been thinking about that afternoon. Lucille drew a slow breath. I don't think I've stopped thinking about it. Gloria lowered her eyes to the lilies resting beside her chair. I was hoping you had. I couldn't. Lucille's voice remained quiet. I kept remembering the look on your face. Gloria smiled without amusement. I was mortified. I know. I thought I'd ruined everything. Lucille shook her head. You didn't. Gloria looked at her searchingly. Then why did everything change? Lucille did not answer immediately. She had asked herself the same thing countless times. Because I didn't know what to do. I've spent so long believing that certain doors should stay closed. Lucille's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. When I realized how you felt, I was afraid. Of me. Not you. Lucille met her eyes. Of what those feelings meant. The honesty in her voice left little room for misunderstanding. Gloria looked out across the lake for a moment before speaking again. I thought your words on the balcony meant you wanted me to move on. Lucille's expression fell. I know. I didn't understand that until later. I wasn't trying to reject you. I was trying to protect you. Gloria let out a quiet breath. From what? From waiting for someone who didn't know how to respond. A thoughtful silence settled gently between them. After a while, Gloria smiled faintly. We're not very good at talking when it matters most. Lucille smiled in return. No, we are not. We're surprisingly bad at it. Gloria laughed. So that's something we have in common. The waiter arrived with their meals, and the conversation shifted naturally to lighter things. They spoke about Gloria's law classes, Lucille's latest manuscript, and the novel Gloria had recently finished. Before long, they had lost track of time. More than once, Lucille caught herself wishing the evening would slow down. Across the table, Gloria found herself thinking the very same thing. The drive back was quieter than the journey to the restaurant. Streetlights slipped across the windshield in steady intervals. Every now and then, Gloria glanced out the window at the city passing by before her eyes drifted back toward Lucille. She looked calmer than she had in weeks. When they reached Gloria's apartment building, Lucille parked by the curb. For a moment, neither of them reached for the door. Thank you, Gloria said. I had a really nice evening. So did I. Lucille smiled. I'm glad you said yes. Gloria laughed softly. I almost didn't. Lucille's smile faded just enough for sincerity to take its place. I'm glad you changed your mind. Gloria nodded. Good night, Lucille. Gloria stepped out of the car, and Lucille waited until she disappeared through the entrance before pulling away from the curb. The roads were nearly empty by the time she reached the mansion. She walked through the front door, greeted the maid who was locking up for the night, and climbed the staircase without turning on the lights in the hallway. Her bedroom overlooked the garden. The lilies along the eastern fence were pale beneath the moonlight. She stood by the window for a long time. The dinner had gone well. Better than she had imagined. Gloria had smiled again. They had laughed together again. Yet something remained unfinished. Lucille rested one hand against the cool glass. Her thoughts drifted back through the past weeks. To the hallway where Alec had collided with Gloria. To the afternoon in her office. To Gloria quietly reading one of her novels. To the rainy evening, the diary, the balcony. The mornings Gloria could barely meet her eyes. Every memory seemed to lead to the same place. She had spent years believing that keeping her heart closed would spare her another heartbreak. Instead, She had watched herself become afraid of every feeling that mattered. She had nearly lost Gloria. The realization settled over her with surprising clarity. Love had never been the thing breaking her. Fear had. A quiet laugh escaped her. She shook her head at herself. She had written countless stories about people finding the courage to love. When it had become her own story, she had almost walked away from it. She didn't want to do that anymore. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not when it was already so close to slipping through her fingers. Lucille picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over Gloria's name only briefly before she pressed it. The call connected after the second ring. Hello. Gloria's voice was gentle, touched with surprise. Gloria, are you asleep? Not yet. Did something happen? Lucille looked out across the sleeping garden. May I come and see you? Gloria hesitated. Then she answered quietly. Yes. I'll be there soon. Lucille ended the call. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't running from what she felt. The streets were quiet by the time Lucille pulled up outside Gloria's apartment building. She sat behind the wheel for a moment with the engine idling. She had rehearsed countless versions of this conversation on the drive over. None of them felt honest anymore. She switched off the engine and stepped out. The evening air carried the cool scent of rain that had fallen earlier, leaving the pavement dark beneath the streetlights. By the time she reached the apartment door, she no longer knew what she intended to say. She only knew she could not leave things as they were. The door opened before she had a chance to knock again. Gloria stood there wearing a simple cardigan over the clothes she had worn to dinner. For a brief second, surprise gave way to concern. Lucille, is everything all right? Lucille nodded. It will be. Gloria stepped aside without another question. The apartment was quiet. A lamp beside the sofa cast a warm glow across the room. 2 teacups sat on the coffee table. I made tea, Gloria said. I wasn't sure if you'd want any. I'd like some. Gloria disappeared into the kitchen. The familiar sounds of a kettle and cupboard doors gave Lucille a moment to steady herself. She looked around the apartment. A novel rested open on the arm of the sofa. Beside it lay a law textbook covered in handwritten notes. Everything about the room felt lived in. It reminded her of the first time she had been forced to stay here because of the rain. She smiled faintly. That afternoon had changed far more than either of them had realized. Gloria returned with a steaming cup and placed it gently in front of Lucille before taking the seat opposite her. Neither woman reached for the tea. Gloria searched Lucille's face. You've been thinking. I have. Since dinner? Lucille nodded. Since much longer than that. The room fell quiet. Lucille wrapped both hands around the warm cup. I owe you an apology. When I read your diary, I wasn't frightened because of what you wrote. She looked down at the tea for a moment before meeting Gloria's eyes again. I was frightened because I realized I wanted the same thing. Gloria's breath caught. Lucille continued before fear could interrupt her again. I had spent so many years convincing myself that loving someone only ended one way. She gave a quiet, self-conscious smile. It became easier to believe I didn't need love than to admit I was afraid of it. Gloria listened without moving. The day on the balcony. I thought I was protecting you. I know. Lucille shook her head gently. I was protecting myself. Gloria lowered her eyes. For weeks she had imagined this conversation. None of those imagined versions sounded like the woman sitting in front of her now. Lucille leaned forward slightly. I kept thinking that if I ignored what I felt, it would disappear. She smiled at herself. It only made me miss you. I missed talking to you. I missed waiting for you to arrive. I missed hearing you laugh with Alec downstairs. Her eyes never left Gloria's. And somewhere in all of that, she drew a slow breath. I fell in love with you. The room became perfectly still. I love you, Gloria. I should have said it sooner. I just didn't know how. Gloria stared at her. For a moment, words refused to come. The weeks of uncertainty. Every memory seemed to fold into this single moment. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek before she could stop it. She laughed softly as she wiped it away. I promised myself, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, that if you never felt the same, I'd let you go. She smiled through the tears. I was trying so hard to keep that promise. Lucille's heart tightened. I am sorry. Gloria shook her head. You don't have to apologize for needing time. She stood from the sofa and walked toward Lucille. When she stopped in front of her, neither of them spoke. Gloria reached out slowly and took Lucille's hand. I love you too. The words were quiet.
Certain.
Lucille closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Gloria's hand remained wrapped around Lucille's. Lucille looked at their joined hands and smiled. I've imagined this conversation so many times. Gloria laughed quietly. So have I. I'm relieved none of those versions actually happened. Why? Lucille looked up. In every one of them, I tried to sound composed. And now, I'm not. Gloria's smile widened. I like this version better. The tension that had followed them for weeks finally began to loosen. Not because every uncertainty had disappeared. Because neither of them was carrying it alone anymore. Gloria led Lucille to the sofa, and they sat side by side. Outside, the wind stirred the trees lining the street. The sound drifted faintly through the slightly open window before fading again. Lucille looked toward it for a moment. When I told you that things come and go. She shook her head. I wish I could take those words back. Gloria's expression softened. You don't have to. They brought us here. Lucille looked at her. I suppose they did. Gloria smiled. Besides, you said something much better tonight. Lucille raised an eyebrow. What was that? You said you'd fallen in love with me. A quiet laugh escaped both of them. Lucille reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair behind Gloria's ear with a tenderness that surprised even herself. I'm still learning. I know. And I probably won't get everything right. I won't either. Lucille nodded. For the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow. Gloria's fingers intertwined with hers. We don't have to know what tomorrow looks like. We just have to meet it together. Lucille smiled. It wasn't a promise that life would always be easy. It wasn't a promise that they would never hurt each other. It was a promise that neither of them would face the future alone. Outside, the first light rain of the night began to fall. Lucille glanced toward the window and smiled. It looks like I'll have to stay until the rain eases. Gloria looked at the rain, then back at Lucille. For the first time, neither of them wished for it to stop too soon. Hand in hand, they watched the lights shimmer across the wet street, no longer wondering whether love was worth the risk.